7.02, resolution to approve the updated 5-year forecast for the fiscal years 2016 through 2020. May I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
And Bart, you're up again.
Thank you. Madam President, members of the board, this is the updated 5-year forecast. Actually, it's kind of the beginning one for this year. So we'll just go through a few slides. And it's probably more than you think, but I won't tell you the number. You might get uneasy. So if we just go through a few of these, as in the future, as in the past, I should say, I like this one. That's a pretty nice little.
I like that. That's the first. Wow.
Like that?
Yeah.
Technology, isn't that great?
Wow.
Anyway, the purpose of the presentation is to provide a standardized tool for long-range planning at the local level. Every school district does this. We basically have to provide this 2 times a year. We provide it in May and October. Statutorily has to be provided. Basically, the state uses this to determine the district's ability to sign the 412 certificate. We do this twice a year. Again, we'll update this again in May. So what I tried to do going forward was to kind of break things out so you could, and I'll break it down even farther than this. What I tried to do here was that this is just on the 5-year forecast, this is just the revenue that makes up the 5-year forecast, and I think my agreement will work here. On the left side is the type of revenue that we have. The next 3 fiscal years are the fiscal years that we've already had. The fiscal year right here is fiscal year 16 is the year we're currently in, and then the next 4 are based on our assumptions. And this is just a typical revenue sheet. I try to put some like things together. You'll see like there's a pink line here and a pink line here. We get that money from the state. There's 2 blue lines you can kind of see there. Here we get those from the state as well, but that's unrestricted aid. The first 2 are public utility and homestead rollback. So this is kind of a breakout. So as we look at, here's like the airplane. Hey, you know, it livens things up. This is pretty dull stuff, so you got to liven it up. What's that? Actually, I didn't finish this till like 4:30. All right, general real estate property taxes. One of the reasons that I highlighted this one for those of you guys in the audience, this line here, if you look around fiscal year 18, you'll see it drops from 104 million in 2017 to 97 in 2018. Our emergency levy actually expires December 31st, 2017. So by law, we cannot project this to be approved. So we have to show you what the revenue will look like if the levy fails, which is what we've done. So that's why I put that on here. You can see that there will be a decrease in roughly 2018. It's roughly about an 8 million decrease because fiscal year 18 takes in the last half of calendar year 17, which we still collect the revenue. So that's why you see half of it go off in 18, the rest of it go off in 19 and 20. So actually, I should make sure I'll bring that back up. Did you like that one? That was
I like that, yeah.
So just keep in mind, the levy, we have to renew this in 2017, or we lose it as a district. One of the things I think we're going to be talking about at a later meeting is we're having somebody come in to talk about the levy options that you're going to have to do. At this point, I would recommend that we approve those just because of the levy decrease. But you'll have a chance to look at those, talk about the different scenarios. The laws have changed. One of the nice things about if you do approve it, we keep the homestead rollback, which is from the law that changed a couple years ago, that any new levy wouldn't include that. So basically the voters get to keep 12.5% of the state paying their money if we renew it with changes. There's some different stuff. So I want to make sure we at least talk about that. Tangible personal property homes, this is or tangible personal property, this is money we get from the state utilities. The property tax allocation line there you see is really the homestead rollback from all the loans that we have. The bottom line, I guess I should have explained this, the bottom graph you see is a difference, what we projected in May of this year versus what we have now. May, we hadn't paid all the bills and everything, so you can see some of the changes. These lines down here is what we projected in May versus November. And as a reminder, I always remind you, we used to get an additional $5.4 million from tangible personal property, but it went away about 2007, 2008. I always like to throw that up for the state just to make sure they remember I didn't forget. State foundation is what we get based on the state aid of the district. We're roughly about 22%. The district receives that basically from the state every year. One of the things, I don't say sure I put in here or not, but based on the new formula, the prior 2 years, or this, I guess the 2 years we're in now, we get roughly 7.5% state aid increase over the prior year. So whatever you got last year, we got 7.5% this year and another 7.5% next year. In our forecast, we only put 3% in there in the last 3 years of the forecast. It's fairly conservative. For every percentage that we get above 3, it's worth $400,000. So if the state comes back and says, oh, by the way, we're going to give you 7%, well, that's $1.2 million that will be added to the district. It'll make a difference. And if you get 7% in fiscal year 18, 19, and 20, cumulative, that's $7.2 million. But we're conservative. I mean, if I present this to you at 7% and it comes in 2, we'd probably be having a different conversation to say, where'd our money go? So we're conservative, going forward. If you want us to put in 4 or 5, I mean, that's assumptions. We can do it. I wouldn't recommend that. We're conservative in these numbers. So they project a 3% increase. This is the state foundation. We have unrestricted grants and aid, and we have restricted grants and aid. You can see what the unrestricted, pretty much you can use for anything. Again, there's still a 10% cap for fiscal year 16 and 17. Roughly, if they were to owe us or pay us everything, they would owe us $9.3 million had they not had a cap, and we would have gotten everything that we mathematically should have. This is a state percentage, so you can see the differences on here. Other revenue, it's just anything that's left over, all other revenue. Again, you can see it's the districts, we're assuming the same level. We get that for property, in lieu of property tax, tuition paid by other districts, any reimbursements, the pay to participate fees, which I will remind you are part of this forecast because the board hasn't taken action on that. So if there's a change tonight, you guys vote on a change, this will affect this forecast and you'll see a decrease going forward. But for now, it's in here because the board hasn't approved that yet. So this was kind of just, again, a summary of what we had in May versus the dollar difference. And really the biggest difference in May was the unrestricted grants and aid went from 7% to what we had in there at, I think, 2.5% was kind of the big one. This is the expenditure side of things. I basically took the forecast and eliminated all the lines that really shouldn't be there to kind of show you what we had in May of 15 versus today. Kind of forget the green line you see down here. That's really not the expenditures. That green line is basically how much revenue we're bringing in more than we're spending. And the reason, if you look at the 3.9, that's really due to state aid. That number, that's really due to well, not state aid. This is expenditures. Those are basically one of the differences. Capital outlay was different. Excuse me, the 97,000, I guess, sidetracked here. This 3.9 million basically was the difference in the dollar. Basically, in fiscal year 16, this number here, we said that our shortfall would be 11.5 million. Based on the state aid, is 15.46. So that's the surplus. The columns we spend up here, one of the differences you see here, back when the board was talking about these for you guys here, these two numbers, back when the board was talking about taking $3 from capital, I had them reversed. I had placeholders in there, they were reversed. So capital, basically, I had, I think it was 1 million, excuse me, 2 million, and it should have been 1 million, and the supply should have been 1 million, it was 2 million. So that's the differences that make the differences in the numbers. The total difference is only $97,000 between one forecast to the other. Through the revenue overview, basically there's a surplus through 2017. With the renewal of the levy projections, we show the district with the levy failing, roughly $2.3 million at the end of fiscal year 18 and nearly $24 million shortfall in fiscal year 20. Keep in mind, we have a $19 million budget reserve as part of these numbers, and the encumbrances, we always have encumbrances about $1.5 million at the end of the year. These are Westerville City Schools expenditure assumptions. Personal services, the salaries reflect what's in our negotiated agreement right now. Those go through 2018. In 2019 and 20, we used 2% for annual increases. It's the same thing we had done prior to negotiations as well. The middle one is the, included in each year is the forecast. The amount forecasted is $450,000. If you remember, we put that number in there each year so that Dr. Kellogg, if he needed to hire staff, it was the equivalent of 10 teachers at a master's 3. It didn't have to be teachers we hired, but that was the number. That's how we come up with the $450,000. A couple of board meetings ago, you gave Dr. Kellogg, instead of to accelerate that process, he could hire more staff this year, but not next year. I will tell you, I kept that in there for fiscal year 17 as a contingency, not knowing what may come at us. You may have to hire more teachers. The state may make you hire, do different programs. So that $450,000, even though Dr. Kellogg's not going to use that in fiscal year 17, I left it in the forecast as a contingency just for not knowing. So if you want me to take it out, I can take it out in May, but we left it in there just as a what if. Okay. That one. This is a personal services, sort of a summary. Again, the green line is the differences in revenues versus expenditures. This is just a summary of where we were. The bottom lines down here, when you look at the bottom lines down here, this is the amount of levy that would be put back in place if it passes. So I kind of wanted to, so you could see, if you see $23 million here on this line, it says you're $23 million short. Well, you've got, the accumulation effect here. I think in another slide I show, I think we end up being 7 million short if the levy passes in that year, which is manageable. Because keep in mind, I have the $450,000 in there, which cumulative over 3 years is 1.2 million that would come off. The state aid, if you get 1.2 million each year, 7 million, that would come off. You would make 2020 pretty much equal for all the things that are in here that could happen. So this is just an example of personal services. This just reflects all the union contracts that are in place. You can see what we had in fiscal year. This number here, what we had in May of versus now, we're only a difference of 85,000. So that's pretty accurate. Employees reimbursement, this is health insurance. Remember, our premiums went up 2.4% in this calendar year. So we have, and then for the next 4 years, we use 10% again. So that could, be to our favor. If next year's 2.4 or 7%, we still have 10 in there. And if I remember right, the city was talking about, they went up 25% this calendar year. So I don't know what happened to that one. Hopefully we won't be in that boat. But you can see for this year, we have 2.4. For the next 4, we have 10s in there. Purchase services, not a lot of changes. It's pretty much self-explanatory. We pay for electric, gas, all the stuff. There's not a whole lot going on in that one. Supplies and materials. This is the one where we added $2 million we took from the permanent improvement fund, and we added $2 million on this line. So you can kind of see really the difference of $971,000 was because I had 1 instead of 2. So that's pretty much on track, and I think we keep like 3% in there each year going out. Capital outlay, again, you can see we added $1 million to this one because we took it from the permanent improvement. We also, in this one, because I think we're doing the transportation, I added $400,000 on this line for new buses. So I have that in this forecast. I think the board has kind of said, I'm not sure if we gave them the go-ahead to do that or not, but pretty sure we are, so I added it. So if we don't do it, I can always back that out. But I already added it's about $92,000, and Mr. Lyons said we needed 4 of them. So it was like $370,000. So I put 400, but other objects, this is mainly just things we pay for the Educational Service Center, property tax collections, win-win agreements, anything that we pay out to any government agencies. It's pretty much where we are here. Transfers out, just remind you, the difference you kind of see where we went from 165 to 109 and 115. When the board made some changes a year ago where we picked up the workbook fees and a lot of the fees for the students, we used to transfer, I think it was $90,000 out every year from the general fund into the 009 Uniform School Accounting group. Because the board's picking up most of those fees, we're only transferring like $50,000. So that's why that number is reduced. We still reflect the $65,000 each year that we're going to transfer into the turf replacement fund, which is an 003 account, to hopefully have enough in there that when we need to replace those. I should have said, if you guys have any questions, stop me. I'm just kind of, Mark said I had 5 minutes, so I'm just trying to. Expenditure comparisons, you can kind of see where we were in May versus now. $302,000 kind of changed overall. There's not a lot there. I've talked about why the capital outlay and the supplies changed was because I had them in reverse order, but that's a comparison. Expenditure overview, staffing increases, remember I told you the $450,000 is in there. Transportation is in there for the 4 new buses. Health insurance was 2.4% increase this year. Somebody asked me today, we started the year in that fund with $7 million as a budget, as a reserve in the 024 fund, which is awesome. So that fund is setting very well. Purchase services expected to grow between 1.5 and 3, nothing major. This was a sort of a summary of the 5-year forecast. If you go online and look for a 5-year forecast, it's not going to look like this. I took out the lines that don't have stuff in them. This is kind of just a summaries of 2.06 is like the total revenue. For you guys over here, this is total revenue. This is total expenditures. This green line is what we are bringing in versus what we're spending. Remember, that's in a deficit in 18, because we can't assume the passage of the levy. That's why you see the deficit. 7.01, which is this line here, that's the cash balances that we have. You can see the encumbrances that we have every year, the $19 million, which is this line as a budget reserve. And at some point, I think some of the board members had talked about increasing that. We can certainly talk about that and change that for the May one.
Now, when you were talking about the 2018 basically in the whole there in the green, that is assumption that the renewal will not be passed.
Right, I can't show that money's in there. I had to pull it out. Right, and I'll show you, I've got another one here that shows it in there as a what if. You can't approve that one, but I'm showing you what if. So these are the summary, so you can see that if the levy fails, you're pretty much going to have, you'll have 47 million. It's this line right here. You'll have 47 million cash, but when you subtract the encumbrances and the budget reserve, you really have 26 million, almost 27 that you can play with.
Now, when can we put more in the budget reserve? How is that?
Well, you can do that at any time. I mean, this reflects what the board wants to do. At some point, if you tell me, hey, at the next forecast,
okay,
we'd like to do that.
So it could be either this forecast or the next
Yeah,
forecast.
the December work session or November meeting, or
Right.
whenever you guys as a board talk about it, you want to update it. This reflects a 45-day
Right.
reserve. I know you can't read this. I'm not even going to try to have you read this. If you go to the website, look at the 5-year forecast, this is the format. Remember I told you this is all the revenue, this is the expenditures on the lines here. The next 3 columns you'll see on the forecast are the past 3 years. That's these 3 columns here. You'll see the current fiscal year, which is this year here, and then you see the next 4. So that's that's the format. So if you get an idea kind of what it looks like, you can't read this. I just want to make sure you see it. This is the one that shows basically if the levy passes.
The renewal.
The renewal.
Win the levy,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. When the levy is replaced, this is what it would look like. Basically, you would have a cash balance of $89 million. You subtract the budget reserve, these 2 numbers here, you would actually have a balance of $68.7 million at your disposal, taking out the budget reserve. So cash-wise, you'd have $89 million. And you can see you're at 7.2 million, this green line, $7.2 million up here is the green line that says you're spending more than you're bringing in. But remember, the numbers I talked about with the $450,000 for 4 years, the state aid that comes in there, the potential medical changes, if we don't hit 10, you could pretty much wipe that out as well, I think. Don't know. But even there's some other things you might do to change, who knows? I mean, you've got 4 years to work on clearing that. So there's a lot of things that can happen. But
right now, for the health piece, you have 10 plugged in all the way
do.
over.
Right.
we do.
And, okay, I just wanted to make sure that I had that right. Thank you.
So this is what it would look like. So for me, at this point, if you ask me, Bart, what are you going to do? Would you recommend the levy? I would. And the laws have changed so that you can even do some different types of renewals. You'd still get the homestead rollback, but there's different ways you can structure it. You can make it continuing, make it 10 years. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do with it. You can change it to where currently right now on the emergency levy, if everybody leaves but Dr. Kellogg, he's going to write me a check for $16 million. That's just how it works. As more people come in, your bill gets less. That's what the emergency levy means. Okay? So as all this new construction around us comes in, the bills kind of get less and less and less. One of the new things that they'll talk about is you can actually sort of set the number it is today, but any new construction coming in will add to the revenue, which could mean you might not have to come back to the voters until a later year.
Right.
So there's different structures that you can look at and still keep the homestead rollback. So that'll be at a different
big
meeting.
time.
But this just shows you what would happen when the levy were to pass.
Right.
Okay. This is just a cash balance that shows where the $19 million are, and so how much money you're still collecting above that, so we're still in good shape. This is just a general fund revenue. It tells you we get 61%, it's this line here, we get 61% real estate, property tax allocation, which is the homestead rollback area there. The unrestricted state aid is 24%. Just gives you a breakout of where the revenue comes from. Now, you like that one?
Yeah,
Nice one, Bart.
now that
It was
was
an origami one.
cute.
Like that one. All right. This is general fund expenditure. Shows you we have the salaries over here in the big column. By far, that's the largest expenditures the district has are salaries and benefits. That's what these two lines here. Those make up basically 76%. We do have other expenditures that we pay for all of our substitutes from the ESC. So, not all 6% is that, but there's part of that column that does make up those numbers. Capital outlay is 2%. Purchase services are 12. So, this is just a breakdown of where the money goes. And then that's it. Did you like that one? That was pretty cool.
It was very nice.
Those are cute, yeah.
All right.
Good job.
Any questions you guys have?
You have a question?
That was a great explanation. You always explain it so well. But, and that's something that I think the board needs to think about, because the previous board actually started the budget reserve, and, I think this board wants to continue it. We did add, well, actually, we haven't added much to it.
We added
Little bit.
we added
30 days,
15
wasn't it?
days. We added
We had
15 days. to it.
That's right.
Okay.
And hopefully that's covered even with our expenditures today. So if we can get to 60 someday, that would be great. So
I
I
don't,
think we can.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't have a question. We all agree up here. We're just so grateful for the way that you do this and the explanation that you provide, not only us, but for the community. And I just would love for the community to jump on the website and just to explore this a little bit. We are talking about expanding, increasing the cash reserve, and we're looking all of those. But I really appreciate the conservative way in which you hold to these numbers. And I just am constantly learning this, I admit. I'm just really still in this learning curve, but I'm very grateful for the way that you continue to bring us along with some just solid financial information.
I will share, too, I didn't talk about that. One of the reasons we were presenting a lot of these numbers, we're actually doing a Moodys presentation tomorrow online. It just worked out. Normally, you can do those with the bonds that we're potentially going to sell. It just happened that it was a 3-year renewal. So we're actually meeting from 9 to 11 tomorrow. We're doing a conference call with Moodys to go over and we'll probably, I'll make sure you guys get a copy of that as well,
Yeah.
because it takes into a lot of the economic things around us. I mean, it looks at everything, enrollment, economics, tax abatements. It's basically, we're basically presenting our district to them, and we're trying to argue even to get an upgrade from where we are. Because 3 years ago, when we met them to do a bond sale, we basically said, listen, we're broke. We have a plan, and we can get there. Well, we did that. We got there. And so now we're trying to say, we did everything you asked us to do. We had a plan. We put it into place, it worked. So we would like an upgrade based on where we are compared to other districts or other entities, our size and magnitude and rating scale. We should be a little higher rating. So that's going to take place tomorrow. We're prepping for 2 hours, and then we're presenting from 11 to 12.
Did you get to use your PowerPoint?
Well, they have one for the group we hired the other day. No, I don't know if he has that one, but yeah, that's what we're doing tomorrow. And these numbers definitely help, because we did show them where we are in a 5-year forecast, and we did show them that when the levy passes, that what it would look like to trying to get an upgrade. So these are great numbers. I mean, when the levy were to pass, you would still be receiving more than you're spending through 2020 on a levy that we said would last 3 years. So, I mean, what a great story. And if you prove it, you might be 21, 22, 23 before you'd have to come back for another one.
Right.
So the district has a great story, and these numbers prove that, so.
Great.
Well, just to quickly jump on the kudos, I think it may get lost, but I can tell you, managing corporate budgets, I wish, and this is now 2 years of these presentations that I've seen, I wish that actuals were within 0.2% in the corporate world, because they rarely are, right? And so when I see these kind of figures and how closely we've come to actual in the year, right, that we're in, it's a tremendous amount of work to make those numbers come in, right? I think the other thing is that that 5-year forecast, the problem and challenge that you always have with that fifth year, that out year, is visibility, right? We don't know a lot of variables that come into that. So taking the conservative approach is definitely the right thing to do. But then on top of that, if you look at those numbers in the fifth year without taking into account that there are a tremendous number of variables that we don't know, then that number doesn't necessarily look good and strong and healthy, when in fact it truly is, right? I think, Dr. French, back to your point, I think we're in a great position. I think another 15 days of operating reserves is certainly within the window of conversation. And I think it makes us an even stronger district if we structure ourselves that way.
And Bart, I want to follow up on what the gentleman said about the strength of the forecast and the unknowns out there, and also agree that, yes, we do want to retain the conservative assumption approach. I think that's really important. I want to give you kudos on the way you've chosen to structure the 5-year forecast. It isn't always done this way in other districts. In a number of other districts, it's based purely on exactly what is happening today, right now. And the problem with that is that's not a forecast at all. And you end up out several years, and the 5-year forecast makes no sense as regards what the district needs to do and the way the funds are appropriated, the way things look to the community, and there always appears to be confusion. I've always worried about that model. I'm really glad that that's not the model we choose, because if you think about the columns that were there and the components that are laid out in the 5-year forecast, it's very clear that we're building in the capacity to continue to make the changes that we've said we're going to make. If we were laying out the forecast exactly as it is today, we would not have built in that capacity and would be continually trying to explain what the heck we were doing financially. So the capacities are there, which gives us what we need to continue to be a really strong district. The thing that has nothing to do with you that just really makes me grumpy is what that forecast would look like if the cap did not exist. If the cap did not exist, we would be having a completely different discussion. We probably wouldn't even be talking about renewing a levy. The cap does exist. Basically what the cap is, the state says, here is the money under the state funding formula that you deserve, Westerville. But we're not going to give it to you. We're going to give you this much instead. So they cap us. It is difficult for us. And what the cap does to all of us who are affected by the cap, which is many of us, it forces districts to continually rely on the local ballot box. So you can make arguments for that, you can make arguments against it, but it's extremely important to understand it, that that's what's happening there. But Bart, thank you. I like the birdies, I like the paper airplanes, I like the whole deal. Most of all, I really appreciate the way that the 5-year forecast is structured.
Thanks.
Okay, the hard thing about going last is you're redundant. So I wrote down a couple things. I do appreciate that you're conservative. You're proactive versus reactive. I like how you added in the staffing, the transportation that we talked about, but we didn't act on yet. You gave us with and without the levy, just how things would work. And then you talked, so the public could hear a little bit about the Homestead Act. And that's so important for people to hear and to be listening about. So thank you. I also enjoyed your little fluffy presentation. Kind of made us
Gotta
giggle
liven
and
it
kept
up
us
somehow.
awake.
This is pretty dull stuff, so you got to liven it up somehow.
Can I hit on, can I jump in?
Yeah.
One, I think I know the answer, Bart, and I bring this up because I think it's going to start getting a little attention. Tangible personal property tax.
Yeah.
There's some legislative effort in there to do something, but everything I read says it's not going to do anything for us. So I think if people are reading that and checking that one, everything I read, and I'll double check, I don't think it's any changes being proposed are going to have any impact on Westerville.
I think it's for the people who still get that tangible personal property tax that we lost 5 years ago. Some get it. The state held it up for a while, but the state said, okay, well, fine, we'll let you keep it, but they're still trying to eliminate it. So I think that's what the legislation's aimed at.
The second thing I'd say is when you have a nice bank account, it's easy to forget your history and make sure you're paying attention to being efficient with what you have. And there's a lot that goes on at the district under the radar that may not get much public attention as to efforts to reduce that financial burden and keep the trajectory of our expenditures down, which is the piece we can control. And so just a couple of things. One, as you remember, recently we did a bond refinance piece that showed money back to taxpayers. There's little things in the background. You may not know it, but we just flipped our copier contract, and when we did, the nature of the copier contract, we did reduce the number of desktop printers we need in the district, and the inkjet, all the inkjet printing and all that stuff that goes on with it. And so our Bob Lyons and his team redid that contract in a way that's proving efficient to us and reducing those costs to us long term. That don't play, little things like that don't play out here, but 25 grand here, 20 here, plays a lot. Construction projects and our management of those and change orders and construction managers is another one. We're looking at things like the kind of materials we give students. We're working on a straight A grant with several of the school districts, including Marysville and Hilliard, I believe. And the straight A grant is looking at partnering with using teachers to start developing our own online open source textbooks. You may have read this for some colleges. That's a great way to go to reduce costs and to make the materials we're using with kids more relevant to our local needs because it's being produced by our teachers. I'm sorry, an Algebra 1 textbook is not that hard to write, and we have really talented math teachers who can probably do it for us. So, and so we're looking at things like that. And the last one I'd point to is staffing is always your biggest cost, as Bart showed there. Typically, you talk about being about 80%. We've got to continue to look at growth, but also looking at management of FTE and all kinds of positions to make sure that we don't lose perspective on what we're trying to do with our community long term. The third thing I'd say is I spent some time looking at the May 2011 5-year forecast, and you can find these online. So if you like doing a little history, I'd encourage you to go back and take a look at the May 2011 5-year forecast, because what you'll see in there is, and what was interesting for me was to look at FY15 on that one and look at FY15, which is in the books today. And you will see that our projections on revenue coming in and our projections on expenditures going out the door were at opposite ends of where we ended up. There were significant changes done internally in this district over time for cost containment that are impacting us favorably today, very favorably today, and that's previous board and previous leadership and community that did that. And the other side, you can clearly see the impact of changes in revenue sources, state aid and property tax, when we're in the wave of economic downturn that was going on. And you can see really vividly the differences in that forecast to today. And the reason I point those out is that FY11 doesn't include the renewal that Mr. Griffith's talking about today. And if you look at FY19, where we pull the revenue from that renewal out, I would tell you if you look at FY19 on this current report and FY15 on that May 2011 report, it's kind of interesting to see what our trajectory's been and how our management of finances over time has been positive to the community's benefit. And I say that because I know there's been this a lot of attention to program building. We referenced transportation. We're going to talk about pay to participate. We've increased some staffing. We've done some things that cost some money. But I think if you look at it historically, 2 years is never a good time. But go back to that 2011 report, and I think you'll start to see, at least in my perspective, some pretty good things. So we'll continue to look at the efficiency side, to continue to look at chipping away where we can have cost containment and still do the right things for kids and for the community and for the taxpayers of Westerville. So I appreciate Mr. Griffith and his staff's work. It's always nice to sit here as a superintendent. And what is that I keep saying, Bart? Nothing new till 22? That's my bumper sticker?
New till 22.
That's what we're going for. Thank you.
Ready for roll call?
Yep.
Dr. French?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.